One more time. John Rochford has been developing accessible websites and online courses since the early 1990s. John's research focuses on artificial intelligence-based web text simplification. John is the director of the Index program. It provides information about professionals, programs, and services for people with disabilities in Massachusetts. See www.disabilityinfo.org. Index also builds websites and online courses that are easy to use by everyone, including people with disabilities. John is a faculty member of UMass Medical School Eunice Kennedy Shriver Center, a research, education, and service center for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. John is an invited expert for the World Wide Web Consortium's Accessibility Guidelines Working Group, Cognitive Accessibility Task Force, Low Vision Accessibility Task Force, and Silver Community Group. Follow John on LinkedIn and Twitter. And here he is.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm John. So I'll start out by saying a couple things. I live in fear of boring people, but I'm legally blind, and so that means I won't be able to see you nodding off, which is a good thing. And I also want to say that I really loved Luis's presentation at the end when he talked about empathy, because in my long experience in accessibility, the #1 thing that convinces programmers and others to pay attention to it is to see people with disabilities try to use technology and struggle with it. And that empathy that they get when they see that is really the most reliable motivator I've seen. Okay, so I'm here to talk to you about a few things, and what I'm going to do is I don't actually read my slides, but just for the people in the room. I should say a couple of other things. This PowerPoint presentation is accessible, and at the end you'll see a link to it, just like Luis did. Another thing that I did with my PowerPoint presentation is that I linked a lot of the slides to resources that I'm talking about, so that if you then download my slides, you get access to all those resources, okay? What I promised to talk about today are these topics: World Wide Web Consortium and the accessibility guidelines of it, digital technology for everybody, and why not just public sites, but private ones should be usable by people with disabilities. Okay. Oh, that's a great intro. That was jogging my memory for what I wanted to say. I feel like singing. So I've been developing accessible websites since the web was born, and even before that, we were using technology. When I say we, I should say that the main way that the public knows Index, the program that I run, and that is that we are the information service in the state for people with disabilities. So if you want to know about doctors and dentists and programs and services and really anything you want to know, go to disabilityinfo.org or call us and we'll help you find it. That's what we do. We're an information referral service. And disabilityinfo.org, there's the plug for you. It's right on the slide. And we've got people right in here in the room, hello people, who are from Index. And but the main thing that Index does is we develop technology for people with disabilities, especially websites and online learning. So if you're blind, you can use our stuff. If you're deaf, if you're a headstick user, it doesn't matter. Okay. My passion is for cognitive accessibility. In the accessibility world, we've always paid attention the most to the blind because that's our primary sense, and that's the disability that is really the most difficult when you're trying to use the web. But in that focus on physical disabilities, people with cognitive disabilities have been left out for a long time. And when I say cognitive disabilities, what I'm talking about is a vast spectrum. So you've got on the low end of ability, you have people with intellectual disabilities, which is the new term for mental retardation. And then you have people with learning disabilities, for instance, dyslexia, dyscalculia, all kinds of cognitive disabilities. Depression, for instance, a hallmark of depression is cognitive function. So it's not just physical disabilities, mental illness as well. And then on the high end, we have everybody as we age. You heard Louise saying that to you, that we're all going to acquire disabilities. Our hearing's going to go, our vision's going to go. But another thing's going to go is our executive functioning, our ability to concentrate, our ability to remember, okay? I conduct research into essentially what I'm doing is, my dream is to simplify text on the web on a mass scale. And I'm taking a couple of approaches to that. One is that in the short term, I've collected, and I'm saying me, but it's a whole team of people. We have collected plain language standards, international and national. We've operationalized them. That means that we've tried to make them easier to understand by people and computers. So an example would be when you're writing a document, use short sentences. Well, what's a short sentence? And so a way of operationalizing that is to say an average of 10 or fewer words. Okay, that kind of thing. And then we're creating simple language with those operationalized rules that we've created, and we're testing the results, the simplified text, with people with intellectual disabilities to see if they can understand simplified text better. And the assumption is that if they can, that means that people who are higher up in the cognitive scale should also benefit from it as well. And we all will. Every one of us will benefit from wouldn't it be cool if the IRS, right, simply explained things to us? Actually, they're supposed to, by law, starting in 2010, the US government passed the plain language law that requires the IRS to do that and other federal agencies. So you'll have to be the judge of how successful they are. Okay, the other way we're doing, this is the long-term approach, is we are teaching artificial intelligence, in this case using machine learning and natural language processing. Those are technical terms for, hey, AI, learn what simple language is. You learn it. We're going to show you millions of examples of it. You learn what it is, and then you produce it. You take typical language that you see, typical text you see on the web, and you simplify it. That's the approach. I recently received funding from Amazon Machine Learning Research Awards, and there were only two criteria that I had to pass in order to get funding from them, and one was a reasonable chance of advancing AI and a reasonable chance of having that work published. So that was really cool and verifying. But another cool thing is that Microsoft recently announced $25 million in funding for projects in accessibility and AI. Okay. I also work for the World Wide Web Consortium, and I'll be talking more about that later. And as you heard in the intro, I'm a member of various groups, working groups at the World Wide Web Consortium, including the Accessibility Guidelines Group, and these other, the Cognitive Accessibility Task Force, and the Low Vision Task Force, and the Silver Community Group. Okay, so pretty much they speak for themselves. The first one, they all feed into the first one, and essentially all of the guidelines you follow, I help write them, and I play a small role in with a very large team, international team of people, and I'll talk about that later. And then I'm also going to be talking about what Silver's doing because it's really cool. Okay. This is my definition of what web accessibility is. Everyone can use the web. That's it. But because I'm talking about accessibility, I'm saying, including people with disabilities. Hi, we're here too. We're part of everybody, right? So to me, this is the definition. Okay. What's important about it? Well, one is, how do we get jobs today, right? The web. How do we find social connections? The web. How do we communicate? The web. If people with disabilities can't do these things, they can't get jobs. You know, they can't communicate with others. So it's really important that we're included. Another important thing, and I'll be talking about this a little bit more, is that all the work that's done to make websites more accessible for people with disabilities, make those websites better for everyone. A good example of that in the real world, you know, curb cuts they're the little bumpy things you see in the corners of sidewalks for the blind. People in strollers, you know, babies in strollers use those things, and delivery men with, you know, the carts, and you know, they're just great for everybody. Okay. The World Wide Web Consortium, really cool. It's international. Every week, I'm talking on the phone with people all over the world, and I love it. An important part of the World Wide Web Consortium is industry partners. That's how the World Wide Web Consortium, the W3C, gets its funding. Because corporations, Microsoft, Apple, you know, Google, everyone you've heard of, they want to say in the regulations that are coming out and the technologies that the World Wide Web Consortium is developing. Every kind of standard you've ever heard of for the web comes from the World Wide Web Consortium. HTML and CSS, everything, including the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Okay. This is a little slide about the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Essentially, they have to be, a number one thing for them is they have to be testable. It has to be that if we produce a guideline, that whether or not you meet that guideline, reliably you can determine whether or not you meet it. So it has to be testable. Every guideline is assigned one of 3 levels. Across the world, the standard is AA and above. So if you design if your country or your organization follows the World Wide Web Consortium guidelines, then anything you do has to be AA or above. That means that the AAA guidelines, nobody follows them, unfortunately. And nobody does. I've never heard of anybody doing it. And you'll see why I'm complaining about that later. Okay. A cool thing, a great thing, is that there's a brand new version. And the first set came out in roughly 98, second 2008, and this third version is 2018. 10-year cycles, you can see. The new version is supposed to include guidelines for 3 new groups, and they are cognitive, low vision, and mobile. I'm on the low vision task force, and the reason that a low vision one was formed was because the focus was on the totally blind, and the vast majority of people who are blind are like me. They're legally blind or have some kind of vision impairment. So there's a lot of work that had to be done there. And then in the cognitive space, very unfortunately, the guidelines that we produced were assigned AAA status, which means that no one's going to follow them. There's been a lot of resistance in the W3C to making the web accessible to people with cognitive disabilities, and this is a result of that. Okay, on the mobile front, when you design a website, you can make it work for mobile devices too. It's called responsive design. And so a lot of what you see on your mobile device follows the World Wide Web Consortium guidelines, and hopefully the accessibility guidelines too. A really cool thing is that the World Wide Web Consortium just revamped its resources for accessibility. And there's a link here to this page in my presentation, but you can see from looking at it, I hope, that it's broken into really great areas, such as explaining it, helping you to explain accessibility, how to test it, how to teach it. Okay. So now I'm gonna so I'm navigating right now via my touch screen and my keyboard. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about web accessibility testing. The number one thing you can do to make your website accessible, I know this is going to come as a shock, is to involve people with disabilities in your testing. There's nothing like having a blind person, a person with a cognitive disability, a person who is a keyboard user or not able to use a keyboard test your website. There are easy checks. If you want to see if a website is paying attention to accessibility, there's some very quick things you can do. And one of them is you can just see, you know, when you hover your cursor on an image, like it'll pop up with a little explanation of what the image is. So if a website has alternative descriptions for images, that's a quick check. Another is you can see if if you use your tab key. When you on a website, I'm pointing the screen. I know it's not a website, but if you start at the top of the screen, let me go back to the World Wide Web website here. Okay, so if you're a blind person or a keyboard user, you know, you start at the top of the screen and you navigate the page by basically hitting the tab key. Okay, and if that tab key takes you to the menu and takes you through the menu choices and then then brings you to the content, and then at the bottom brings you to the footer information, then it's logically it's the navigation set up for logical navigation by people who can't see it. But if it brings you down to the footer first, which is actually quite common, folks, or it brings you to like a side, one of those, like a side column or a whatever, you know they're not paying attention to accessibility. But there are tools, free tools on the web that will do a single page check of whether or not the page is accessible. And there are a bunch of them, and the Easy Checks link has them. Okay. So now I'm gonna use my keyboard again. And all right, Here's a really important thing to know, folks. There are lots of commercial tools that are being developed, and they're getting better and better, but they basically can't find accessibility problems more than 30% of them. So they're good at the low-hanging fruit, you know, like the finding the most problems. I mean, finding a problem and then all of the thousands of instances of it. But they're not so good at really anything above that. 70% of the errors really have to be caught by people. And I know this is going to come as a shock, but I'm talking about people with disabilities, okay? How else? You can't depend upon your sighted developers to test for people who are blind. There is a filterable list on the World Wide Web Consortium website where you can choose the different kinds of automated tools by various criteria. So there's the link to it there. Okay. I actually don't care for the term accessible. I like the word usable because people understand that better. When you talk about a usable website, that's a lot more clear to people than if you say accessible. People often confuse the word accessible with available. If a site is accessible, oh yeah, I can get to it. No, that's not what I mean. But if I say a site is usable by people with disabilities or usable by everyone, people immediately know what I'm talking about. So why do we care? Why should companies, universities, et cetera, care about accessibility? Well, because a large percentage of the population has a disability worldwide. And if you're not making your website accessible, you're leaving those customers out. Why the heck would you want to not have customers? You open yourselves up to lawsuits, which are increasingly prevalent and increasingly successful, and you cause problems for everybody. All right. The vast majority of websites are owned by employers and are inaccessible. And why is that important? Well, because if you're a person with a disability who's working for that employer, you're not going to be able to do the things that your coworkers can because your internal systems aren't designed to be used by you. And not only that, but you're going to be less likely to be employed because if your prospective employer detects that you have a disability, that employer may not hire you because that employer's systems are inaccessible and that employer doesn't want to have to spend the money to make them so. Okay. So as I said earlier about websites, 90%, even more than 90% are inaccessible today, still. If your website doesn't work with assistive technology, like a screen reader, so a screen reader is a piece of software, typically, that reads aloud in a voice what we as sighted people can see on the screen. And if your website doesn't work with that screen reader, doesn't work with that assistive technology, it's not accessible. If you build accessibility from the very beginning into your web design and your website, it's cheap, it's inexpensive, and it's easy. And if you wait to the end, or you wait till later in the development, you're going to find, oh my goodness, it's expensive and difficult, and you've really done yourself a disservice. Web accessibility is law. Web accessibility is law in this country and in other countries. And there's a lot I could say about that, but the important thing is that big companies, I'm talking about Netflix and Target and Blackboard, and I shouldn't have said Blackboard. Anyway, actually Blackboard is a different story. But anyway, they're falling to lawsuits because they're airlines. My whole life, I wasn't able to order my own airline tickets until last year, when airlines started to make their websites accessible. Okay, I want to talk about a really cool technology, cloud-based accessibility, personalized accessibility, and not just for the web, but for the Internet of Things. You know, it's going to be soon that you're not going to be able to buy a refrigerator, a stove, really anything that's not connected to the internet. And there are already these kinds of appliances coming out. And the camera that Luis was talking about, that too could be connected to the internet. And we have alarm systems, all kinds of things that are connected to the internet. Why is that important? Well, because this is how the cloud-based personalization service works. You register for it. You say, hi, I'm John, and here are my preferences. I want the display or the interface to talk to me. I want white text on a black background. Whatever my preferences are. And when I pick up that device or I visit that website, I get recognized and the interface customizes itself to me, to my preferences. Silence in the room, because I'm assuming you're all very impressed. And you should be, because this is the future, folks, where when you use things, devices, and when you're on the websites, they're going to recognize you if you sign up. It's voluntary, it's confidential, and it's going to conform itself to the way you think, the way you navigate, the way you consume content. Okay. Another example of how web accessibility is affecting the world is in closed captioning. And Netflix didn't want to have to close caption its movies. And the FCC said, yes, you will. And so it does. And not only does the Netflix do closed captioning, but it also does audio description, which I love, because when the characters are not talking, there's a narrator who's telling me what's going on in the movie, the facial expressions of people, and the action that's happening, and all kinds of things. It's great. Okay. Yeah, so, and closed captioning is in televisions and phones, and, you know, you go to a bar, you go to an airport, and the TV is mute, but you see closed captioning, and it's you can read, right? So everybody's benefiting from that technology that was developed for the deaf. You're going to be hearing about wayfinding technologies today. And what wayfinding is, it means indoor navigation for people who are blind and who have cognitive disabilities and others, because GPS doesn't work inside buildings, folks. And so I get lost at airports. I have missed flights because I couldn't find my gate in time. This is in the early days before airlines decided to help people with disabilities. We're encouraged to help people with disabilities, shall we say. And so it's really in its infancy in terms of then there are lots of different ideas about how it can work better, but essentially the idea would be that you could just pick up your phone and you'd say, take me to gate 20, and your phone would give you directions, walk you right to gate 20, just like Google does and Apple Maps do to get to your destinations by car. Okay. Here's the summary slide, folks. That means this presentation is thankfully almost over. Okay. So what I've been talking about is how web accessibility standards, what they are, a little bit about how they work and why they're important, and what they affect beyond the web, okay? And I just want to emphasize once again that they're really actually quite easy and inexpensively, you can apply them to your development from the beginning. And folks, why wouldn't you want to make everything you do usable by everybody? If somebody has a good reason, I'd like to hear it, just so I could trounce you. Okay, so I think I'm going backward. Okay, so here's my thank you slide. You'll see that, like Luis, I have a bit.ly link for my presentation. Unlike Luis, I don't have a QR code, so I learned from him. And you can get my presentation from that link, and it has all the resources in it. And now I'll take questions. Oh, by the way, I can't scan the room and see if anybody's raised their hand. So just say my name, John. And if you have none, great, we'll leave early. Yeah. Yeah, well, I'm a little unsure about how to answer, so I'll answer in a couple of different ways. One is Index develops lots of websites and learning management systems and online courses for state agencies across the country, and we make them all accessible, and we involve people with disabilities as we're developing them, just like I'm talking about. And then as they identify problems, we're fixing them. And it's a continuous process. As the public uses our sites, we are improving our accessibility. Another way we involve the public is that, remember what I was talking about, we're gonna feed to artificial intelligence millions of examples of simplified text so that it can learn what simplified text is. We're gonna be doing crowdsourcing to develop that enormous data set. We're going to be involving the public. We're doing a project this summer to start building that. And then we're always going to conferences, and I help run a conference every year, the Boston Accessibility Conference in the fall. We've had a lot of corporate sponsorship. And if you're interested, please write to me, and it's for developers. We're trying to get the development community knowledgeable about accessibility. And we have about 100 people every year from all over the world. It's cool. We had a big AI panel. AI and accessibility is just, AI is everywhere. And it's also in accessibility. Okay, what else? Yeah. Have I told you I love you? Yeah, there are a bunch of sources. The Perkins School for the Blind, the Carroll Center in Newton. They certainly can help you with people with vision loss. But there's this really cool website. It's called disabilityinfo.org. And if you go there and you send in a request, we can connect you with all kinds of agencies across the state that serve people with disabilities and have people with disabilities who want to help you test websites. Yep. Next. Yeah. Yes. Okay, well, a big one is there's an incredible range of cognitive disability. And so there's a resistance because there's this intimidation factor of, how can we possibly serve this enormous population of people who have an enormous variety of cognitive function problems? That's one. Another is that people in the international accessibility world, there are a few of us, and we've been fighting the accessibility fight for decades, and it's been a very frustrating journey because nobody pays attention to us. I'm complaining now, I know. And very few, I should say. And so to then, on top of that, serving people with physical disabilities, it's so hard. Now we have to consider people with cognitive disabilities. That's another one. And the third one, I think the big one is, when we talk about accessibility, traditionally, it's always been about the design of websites. But now with cognitive, you have to pay much more attention to the content, because it's the content that you have to make accessible. You have to make simple text so people can understand it. You have to do all kinds of things to make the content accessible. And that's another burden. So those are reasons. Next. Well, as I said in the beginning, and I'm saying now at the end, have them watch someone with a disability try to use the websites that they've either created or they use, and watch those people struggle to use those websites. And if that doesn't inspire them, I'm sorry for you. Yeah. So I'm glad you asked that. On the WAI site that I showed you, it has links to those, some of those, and they're on YouTube, and they're not just people with physical disabilities, but cognitive. And if you can't find them, let me know, and I'll help you. Yeah, right, right, because there already are videos, folks, that were created for this reason. So you don't have to, okay, I'm not gonna say this. I'm not gonna say you don't have to bring in someone with a disability, because you should, you must. But there are also videos that you can rely upon. Yeah. Well, I can tell you, I can give you other ways to motivate people. So we can approach me later and I'll talk to you about it. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, there are some universities, actual real ones, that are also, I think maybe two, that are a little more, that have developed curricula regarding including accessibility in development. Okay, what else? Yeah. Yeah. Well, what's happening, and I assume, and I know you're going to be hearing about this later today, is the 5-campus effort to educate people and incorporate accessibility into everything that all the universities do. It's it's an infrastructure thing. It's a top-down thing. It's a bottom-up thing. It's going to take passionate people at every level, or at least interested people at every level, to make it happen. And we must make it happen as a university, because why the heck would we not want to educate everybody and make our education available to everybody? And also, why would we risk lawsuits? You know, because we're not doing that. And that's happened to Harvard, and it's happened to MIT, and it's happened to lots of other universities. So, next, yes. Yeah, and in fact, I have my own private collection of those. So if you'd like to approach me later, I'll be happy to provide those to you. And the World Wide Web Consortium on that page that I showed you has some of that stuff. And then I want to talk about something else. But did that answer your question? Okay. Hey, you're going to be hearing later today, hopefully, from Lainey Feingold. She's remotely talking, and I'm telling you, you want to go to that presentation, because this is the woman who has changed the face of accessibility in our country. She's an attorney, and she does it through what she calls structured settlements. So what she does is she has plaintiffs, and she approaches a company like Bank of America or whoever, and she says, how would you, I have some people that can't use whatever of yours, how would you like to work with us to fix that? Rather than saying, hey, I've got some people with disabilities, we're going to sue you because they can't use what you've got. And that approach has been incredibly successful time and time again. Companies respond really well to that, and it really works well, and she's going to talk to you about that. So I hope you go. Yes. That's a great question too. Well, I could talk quite a bit about that, but here's how it is currently in the US. You may know that there's a federal standard called 508. That's been the minimum standard in our country for federal agencies and any entity that receives federal funding. There are other laws in our country like 504, which started them, and I can go into the whole history of that, which I won't, but the 508 standards are the only federal standards that include specific web accessibility standards. So federal agencies follow those. However, in the waning days of the Obama administration, after 10 years of working on this, the federal government decreed that the 508 standards now match the WCAG 2.0 standards, okay? And so that means that all federal agencies must follow those standards by that law, which was cool. The Trump administration has publicly announced no intention to enforce that, okay? However, it really doesn't matter, folks, because any federal agency that's not following those are going to be sued. It's going to be sued, and that's how that federal agency will fall. So it'll just take longer. Yes. So there's a newly formed, as of 2 years ago, International Association of Accessibility Professionals. And it has training, and it has certification exams, and it's easy to go find. Just type in IAAP, or actually I won't find it. Type in International Association of Accessibility Professionals, and you'll find it. I don't know. but I know the person who would know. So if you approach me later, I'll tell you. What else, folks? You got me here. Like, this is your chance. Anything else you want to know? How disappointing. All right. Thanks, everybody.